Hi everyone and welcome to my unit plan. Throughout this project I was able to use Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences to make selections of technology that are really making a difference in the education for the students. I think often people choose technological resources just for the simple act of using technology, but through this I was able to understand how to use it to make a difference in education and not just to supplement education. Enjoy.
The content standards for this unit plan outline the content that the students will be learning throughout instruction of all of its lesson plans. The content varies in multiple facets of music education in order to grant students an authentic level of fluency in music. The first category is an artistic perception. These instill a technical understanding of music content and feature the theoretical understanding and performance of intervals, harmonic progressions or major and minor scales, and chordal patterns. The second category will allow students to understand the cultural component in music composition and the implied approach towards performance. These standards will allow students to identify cultures with an emphasis on diverse forms of expression and articulation. The last category will have students understanding the manner in which all the aforementioned standards affect the perception of music. Specifically, the students will use technical and cultural components of student performances as criteria for evaluating the aesthetic perception of the music. The Common Core standards utilized for this unit plan serve as a means of constructing learning and evaluative activities for students that allow them to think deeply and critically about the content standards. This approach towards instruction will ensure that the students fully comprehend content in various settings and not just with this specific class repertoire. Lastly, the technology standards utilized for this unit plan will ensure that students are participating in instruction using various technological tools in effective manners. The inclusion of technology with these standards improves student creativity and innovation, communication and collaboration, and lastly, research and information fluency. It also ensures that the inclusion of technology is purposefully utilized for enhanced understanding of instruction and not just for the simple intention of garnering student interest. This unit plan features a variety of standards that allow the students to picture the aesthetic intentions of the role of music. Since this unit plan is intended to establish a more authentic sense of fluency in the language of music, the following in-depth understandings allow students to comprehend the multiple aspects that accompany the aesthetic perception of music. The summative intentions for this unit plan are driven by the understanding of the aesthetic value of music, and this is because this is the component that has a direct effect on all experienced music lovers. Whether the music lover is well versed in formal music education is irrelevant in this context. The aesthetic value of music essentially determines the long-lasting effect that music has on its listeners. For example, we may have all experienced musical moments in our lives in which we feel a range of emotions or experience profound imagery upon auditory perception. It is this form of musical reaction that embodies the affective nature of the aesthetic character of performed music. Even though music is perceived in a variety of ways, it is the approach towards the multiple components of a formal understanding of music that drives the aforementioned perception. Specifically, a performer's approach towards the various technical and expressive demands of playing a musical instrument in an ensemble of people contribute towards an audience's perception of a high-quality aesthetic perception of music. The knowledge and the skills of this cognitive intention for this unit plan are exactly what the students experiencing this instruction should walk away with. This unit of study begins with a technical understanding of music and specifically the repertoire selections for this class. First, the students gain deep technical knowledge of the intervals that create major and minor scales. This knowledge will allow the students to understand the construction of various scales, which are the foundation of the notes selected within the class repertoire. An understanding of the scales and fluency in these scales will ultimately improve note accuracy and give the students a solidified theoretical understanding of the content of given musical works. This is precisely the reason that instruction of the construction of major and minor scales comes next. Finally, the students have an opportunity to understand the organizational component of the scales. In order to do so, first the students comprehend the chordal structure of the pieces in the class repertoire. Secondly, instruction regarding how various tones at different positions in the scale or scale degrees are congruent with different types of chords in the chordal structure of a given song will be delivered. This will allow students to understand the mechanical works of the harmonic component of the music they perform and increase accuracy and intonation. Next, the students will understand the cultural influences of the music that they perform. Not only does culture and music help to perform with specific imagery in mind, but it also determines stylistic approaches towards tone production and articulation of notes. Students will gain first-hand experience in the sounds of music from the given cultures of the class repertoire and will have an opportunity to familiarize themselves with sounds for the incorporation of stylistically congruent sounds in their performances. Lastly, the students will receive explicit instruction on the aesthetic valuing of music. However, the aesthetic criteria are determined by the effect that the other components have on the public perception of music. Specifically, students will internalize and analyze the manner in which the technical and theoretical and the cultural influences of a performance affect the perception of the potential listeners. This will undoubtedly allow students to understand the importance of authentic fluency in music and will ensure that students actively consider all components of music when performing in communal ensembles like those that are traditional in scholastic settings. When considering the use of technology for each given lesson, it was important to consider the manner in which the technology would be used and the relation that it had with the content. The use of technology in classrooms can often be passive in nature and has little effect on the level of learning and understanding of the students. Furthermore, unprepared educators run the risk of utilizing technology in ways that are simply just for technology's sake. This was precisely what determined the inclusion of Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences in instructional planning. This allowed for facilitation of technological selection and planning instruction. The following is a breakdown of the technology choices in this unit plan and the manner in which they enhance the diverse learning theories. In considering verbal learners and the use of technology, I elected to have various types of technological purposes that appealed to this body of learners. Specifically, most of the resources had a direct connection with the characteristics of these types of learners. Apps like voice memo apps and websites like voicethread.com were selectively chosen for verbal learners to not only have an avenue to verbally speak their knowledge, but also to interchange ideas. When considering interpersonal learners, it was clear that students would need to be in a learning environment that was collaborative and structured. The connection between technology resources, although often indirect, was still highly effective. Specifically, students often utilize tools like Google Docs and music notation software like Finale or Sibelius in order to use collaborative work groups to accomplish a common goal. Kinesthetic representations of musical learning connect naturally, which is due to the kinesthetic nature of music performance. Most musical instruments require kinesthetic response when utilized in performance environments. Therefore, the use of technological resources was utilized in conjunction with the kinesthetic nature of music performance. For example, the lessons indicating the necessity to learn major and minor scales presented an opportunity for students to kinesthetically reflect the ascending and descending nature of scales. Therefore, students did this while performing various scales, utilizing a digital keyboard on a tablet or smartphone. Since interpersonal learners need space for personal reflection, processing, and analysis of course content, it was important for me to allow them the space to do so, but the necessary technological resources to aid them in documenting the results. Notation apps and apps like Spotify or Pandora allowed them tools to have content and analyze a place to record their personal analysis. These allowed for interpersonal learners to grow specific to their strengths. Naturalist learners place a very specific demand on the learning environment and therefore require apps that were more specific to the tendencies of a naturalist learner. Specifically, apps like MindMeister or Tenuto, the evaluative apps that accompanies the music theory app, allowed for students to classify content in ways that were up to interpretation and to classify theoretical knowledge as specified in the Tenuto app. The visual spatial learner places a need in instruction for content to be represented and explained in manners that are visual. With this in mind, apps such as music theory were utilized to present content knowledge in ways that were effectively visual, and music notation software was utilized with an emphasis on the relationship between ascending and descending relationships between notes and tones. The musical intelligence was easily the most appealed to intelligence throughout the unit plan. However, I did make an effort to find varying connections to these students. I utilized things as simple as a virtual keyboard to a recording of music to drive a deep analysis of culture, technique, and style. Lastly, the logical learner I found placed the need on instruction to be explained logically or mechanically in a manner that seemed to make chronological sense to the students who were strongest in this category. Therefore, the music theory app was used extensively because of the sequential manner in which the presented lessons were structured, and additionally, virtual and digital keyboards were also utilized when creating major and minor scales. This is because of the chronological and sequential way that notes are placed in these scales.